Gigi Os4is asks if I could do one of my stats videos for Coquitlam. And I'm going to do one better than that. I'm actually going to do three better than that because so many of my clients these days are leaving Surrey and buying properties in Coquitlam, Poco, New West, and of course, Port Moody. So today, Gigi, you got it. I'm going to cover all four of these cities and show you exactly what's gone on with prices, sales, and inventory, not only in the detached market, but also in condos and townhouses, in an effort to better educate you about the market. Because some of these areas and asset classes are really suffering, while others are doing just fine. So subscribe to the channel not only to stay up to date on my hometown of Surrey, but also its surrounding cities. Click the like button because it really helps. And know that if you need my help in any of these cities around the Lower Mainland, you can book a call with me right now using the first link in the description below at a time that works best for you. Okay, let me get you a little bit situated so you understand exactly what it is we're looking at. This is the detached market in HPI, or Home Price Index, the most accurate calculation of prices over the last 5 years. The orange line is Port Moody, so all you Port Moody folks, pay attention to the orange line. The green line is Coquitlam. Then we have New Westminster, and Poco is the red line. And the first thing you'll notice if you're used to being here on this channel, which focuses mostly on Surrey and the Fraser Valley real estate market, is that this market is a whole bunch more stable, specifically in the last, let's call it 6 months, than previous markets. So now this is the last 3 years. This was the peak of the market. It actually peaked in Port Moody in May of 2022, rather than most places that peaked a little bit earlier. And things, they did get rough, but they have stabilized. Now, Coquitlam is seeing a little bit more of that kind of Surrey trend where we've seen a much more recent downturn, but Port Moody is holding strong. I guess you could say, for the most part, Port Coquitlam is also holding strong, but they did see a little bit more of a downturn at the beginning of the year. But I think my takeaway from these stats is that this, outside of maybe Coquitlam, which does suffer, sometimes it doesn't have the desire of some of these other kind of tighter communities, I'm seeing just a pretty stable market. And that's not what's happening here in my more local market of Surrey. We are seeing massive declines now, and I'm sure I'll show that to you in upcoming videos. Looking at the median sale prices is why I don't focus on median. You get an area as small as Port Moody, and it can fluctuate so great. Like, look at this, Port Moody, 2.38 in January of this last year, and then in September, all the way down to 1.6. We know that's not necessarily the case. It's just a very, very small area. You're going to kind of see the same thing in average pricing. Coquitlam is definitely the biggest of these markets, so that's why it's smoothed out so much more. But I do like to check out the year-over-year averages sometimes. There's no way that New Westminster is down 20% or Port Moody is down 26%, as I kind of talked about earlier. So let's take a look here at the realities of the market. New Westminster is suffering. It's down 5% year over year on the benchmark. Port Coquitlam is down 2%. Coquitlam is down 3%. And look at this, Port Moody is actually holding firm, and they don't have any declines in the detached market at all. Let's take a look at the number of sales. Overall, not a lot of properties selling. Obviously, Coquitlam, again, is the larger of the geographical areas. There's more actual product there, which we're going to see soon. But we are seeing that seasonal decline now of actual sales happening. New listings coming to the market, also now doing its seasonal decline. Let's kind of zoom out on this maybe a little bit so you can see it a little bit better. Very seasonal with new listings coming to the market in all of these areas. Active listings, though, relatively were remaining high. Coquitlam now sitting at 442 active listings on the market. That did peak out in just before the summer at 5.25. But these other three markets are actually quite small. So you're not going to see these massive shifts. Let's go back to when the time in the market was crazy. Where are we? February 22. You had, for instance, in Port Moody, 35 active detached homes. I mean, I guess we're 3 times that now. So do you have 3 times the inventory? Let's take a look at the same thing here in Coquitlam. You're at 440, and around that same time, well, you have 4 times. So again, Coquitlam seems to be the market that's suffering the most. It has the most amount of inventory, and it seems to be coming down the most in prices, while the other ones are smaller markets, so they're not doing so bad. Months of supply, however, this is going to be telling. It actually is New Westminster that's in the worst shape at the moment with 11 months of supply. Poco is seemingly doing the best. It is usually the most affordable. It's the furthest out into the valley at 7 months of supply, but all of these cities appear to be in buyer market territory, with Poco doing the best just into buyer market territory. New West all the way up at 11. This is going to be the same number, just done in a percentage. The lower this number, so the higher this number is in months of inventory, the worse it is. When you convert it into a percentage, it's the inverse, and it's the other way around. And right now it appears that, again, Port Moody is not necessarily doing so great. However, all of these markets are definitely not in the favor of the seller. In other words, prices are not going up. The best case scenario right now appears to be Port Moody in prices, and that's just prices staying flat. Percentage of original price. So this gives you an idea. Let me zoom in on this for you. This gives you an idea of where the actual negotiations are from the original list price, and then more importantly, the average of current list price. So in Port Moody, negotiations are actually pretty good. We actually had a very solid negotiation. We got the price down quite a bit recently on a purchase in Port Moody. 4%, 4.5%, the prices are coming down there on average. New Westminster, 96.2% of ask. Port Coquitlam at 95.8%. And then Coquitlam is actually the one that seems to be sticking kind of closest to the asking price, excuse me. However, still negotiating in most cases in detached off at least 3% or more. Price per square foot, I'm not going to focus on in detached because it means nothing. And then we're going to take a look at the average days on market. And one thing I like to do here is I like to look at a bit of a rolling average, so we can see there's a 6-month and then there's a 12-month. The reason I like to look at 12-month rolling averages for some of these stats is it shows you the general trend averaged out over 12 months. And obviously you can see that for the entire year, all of these areas, all of these cities, it's taken from, let's call it here, about 30 days on market. And now we're 35 to 40 days on market. So not a substantial increase, but it is showing that the average time it takes to sell a home on the marketplace is extending. Moving now into townhouses, looks like a bit more of a bumpy ride in all of these areas, and they are all now seeing a steady decline. I'm going to zoom in within the last year here, and we're going to look at about June. And look at that. We're just seeing a steady decline in all of these areas now. So New Westminster and townhouses, even though there's not a lot of townhouses in that area in particular, like you would see in some of the other more kind of suburban areas, because New West has kind of got that little old town feel with a bunch of detached homes and then a bunch of condos, down 3.9%. Port Coquitlam down 4.3%. Coquitlam down 3.1%. And Port Moody, are there any townhomes in Port Moody? I guess there's a few. But there are down 1.3%. Median, again, average, all over the place, not very helpful numbers. Looking at the overall number of sales. Now, this is only for 1 year, so let me zoom out so you can kind of see the 5-year trend. Obviously, we had in 2021 lots of sales, lots of sales. The amount of sales in Coquitlam townhouses at the beginning of the year was actually pretty good, but now we're down to like 20 sales just last month. So I'm going to zoom in here. Again, let's zoom into the year. And you can see that in all of these cities, so you've got New Westminster, you've got Poco, and you've got Port Moody, sales they're minuscule, but they're holding firm. It does again appear to be Coquitlam that is in the rougher shape of the bunch. New listings to the market, obviously, again, that is going to start to decline. But look at this. Let's see if we can go out any further and see. Look at the townhomes coming to Coquitlam and how many there were on the market or coming to the market. These were new townhomes coming to the market in April of just this last year. Seasonally, that's going to come back off again, as is the active listings in the marketplace. Wow, my goodness, look at how many townhomes, record number of townhomes on the market in Coquitlam in the summer of this last year. And even at the spot we're at right now, it seems to be very close to the records back in 2013. Zoom back in here. Take a look at the months of inventory going up. It's actually New Westminster that was the most oversupplied. Everybody's coming back down into balanced market territories for months of inventory, which is actually, I guess, a good thing for sellers. You're not going to see steep price declines much further. Maybe the result is we have seen those steep price declines because you were sitting up here at like 8 months supply. But not, I don't know. I don't really like these numbers. There's not a ton of townhomes in these areas compared to, say, areas like Surrey or Langley. Percentage of list price. What are we negotiating off? Look at this. They're really, really tight. The averages are like 2.5% in New Westminster, but basically less than 2% off if you're negotiating a deal these days. And look at that, number's been actually relatively consistent. Price per square foot could be important, I guess, but definitely looks like everything's kind of on the decline. Days on market, much more important. I want to average this out again and take a look at the 12-month rolling. And as you can see, we are definitely increasing. Nothing like we saw, back in the pandemic days, or the early days of the pandemic, I guess you would call it. Let's go back to 12 months and let's look at that over the last year. So New Westminster seemed to have a lot of townhomes on the market at one point in 2023. But since the beginning of this year, again, we're going from about that 21 to 25 day range. And at this point, we're sitting at about a month on the market for the average townhome in all 4 of these cities. Now, condos, look at these declines in condos. Now, I guess we should look at Port Moody and look at the fact that it held up very well. Port Moody condos at the peak of the market for everybody else back in, let's call it May of 2022, we're sitting at 741. They got higher than that in July of last year, but have been on kind of a steady downturn of late, as are Coquitlam. Now, Coquitlam never reached their peaks before. That's the green line that we're looking at here. Just steady declines, though, and it's declining everywhere. Condos in all of these cities are not doing as well as the detached markets have been. It's almost like a little bit of a reverse, it feels like, of a lot of the other areas that we've covered, where the detached now in my market seems to be doing even tougher. Although condos, let's face it, condos are really taking a hit in some areas in Surrey and the rest of the valley as well. Port Moody, not a lot of condos again, but prices are high, so down 6.6%. Coquitlam down 5% year over year. Poco down 4% year over year. And New West down 3.5% year over year. So we are seeing steady declines. I'll show you the average prices, but again, average and median, sorry, the other way around. I guess that was median, then average. They're really bouncy, but obviously trending downwards. The amount of sales happening, not bad. I'm going to say Coquitlam looks like it's trending downwards. Maybe New West is also trending downwards overall. If I zoom out more than 3 years, we can probably see that. But Port Moody, not a lot of sales happening, but not a lot of units, so staying fairly firm. And Poco, actually, I'm kind of shocked that we're not seeing massive declines in any of those areas. New listings coming to the market. Again, seasonal declines are happening. Nothing crazy there. This is a bit of a glitch here, it looks like, in the amount of Port Moody new listings coming to the condo market over, it looks like, September and October, but now trending down again. The rest I don't think are too crazy. Not too high, not too low. Active total listings on the market, however, I'm going to zoom out on this one and take a look at Coquitlam. Wow, can we go to the maximum, to the 20 years? Coquitlam now has more active listings on the market, even in November, than it has in history that I can see. This only goes back to 2005, so this is the great financial crisis here. Obviously, that's building more units in general, but the overall market, again, is a lot slower. New Westminster never got there. And Port Moody seems to be high as well relative to the last year or two. But look at Port Moody way back in '08. It went through some rough times. There was 255, 256 active listings on the market at that time, and now only 185. Month supply, Port Moody seemingly doing the worst at the moment, but none of these are really terrible. These are, let's call it, balanced to buyer market territory. But it's the climb that you're seeing here in the month supply that is really causing those prices to start coming down even more drastically. So it's the increase of month supply that is getting worse, not necessarily where they're at right now. Sales to actives obviously going in the inverse of that. Percentage of original price I'm not going to focus on. Let's go to percentage. What's the deal? Again, the deal is looking like right now, almost universally 2.5%, maybe 3% off of the price in each one of those cities. Price per square foot, much more important in condos than anywhere else. I'm going to try and roll this out so we can see what's going on. And yes, we are now seeing that decline. So price per square foot is coming down in declines, but I mean, generally speaking, I guess it's POCO that's seen the biggest amount of suffering over the last little bit here. But yeah, declines happening there. And then days on market, I guess I should have kept that 12 months rolling. It's really jumpy, but obviously we're going to see that it's creeping up. If I changed it to 12 months rolling, we're going to see that exactly what I was thinking. So at the beginning of the year, if you had a condo in any one of these areas, again, between 22 and 27 days on average in the marketplace, we are now over 1 month. Let me know in the comments if you think that these markets performed better or worse than what you had expected before watching this video. And check back soon because there will be more Surrey-based stats on the housing market headed to this channel in the coming days.